And how are my listeners? We're at chapter 6, verse 13 of the Book of Esther. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordicai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. Notes. And these wise men right here, this is actually a terminology of irony, because these wise men, for the very first time I can tell, were actually right. Said in irony by the Holy Spirit, of course. Verse 14. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Notes. Well, we have nothing unusual here. This was normal for servants to be sent to escort guests of importance from their own homes to the place of entertainment, okay? A protocol and formality. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? It shall be performed even up to half the kingdom. Notes. Now, you don't have to be Einstein or Sigmund Freud to figure out that the king's curiosity is just running plumb off the charts. Okay? Right off the Richter scale. Verse 3. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we have been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Notes. Even in the case of the latter, with all the Jews made into slaves, the king's revenues would have been injured beyond compensation, is what she's saying. So the empire was going to lose in every capacity, at least if this thing was carried out. Boy, she was really smart for telling the ruler that much. Verse 5. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, who does presume in his heart to do so? Verse 6, I kind of giggle a little bit. And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Notes. Oh boy, he is in a lot of trouble right now. Esther adds the word enemy to the list with the insinuation that in actuality Haman was an enemy of the king also. In other words, he was playing the king for all he could get and was being very successful, at least up until now. And boy, she nailed it right on the head right there. And as you can imagine, the king is rather ticked off. Verse 7. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Oh, well, gee, isn't that pretty obvious? Verse 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Notes. Well, actually, this is actually a type of a reclining couch of ancient times, and as was the custom then at banquets, okay? Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Notes. Well, kind of imagine this. Imagine that you're bowing down on top of a lazy boy recliner, and your arms are up. He's basically pleading for his life. And in his pleading with Esther for his life, he more than likely sought to grab her feet or her garments, as was, kind of what you do whenever you beg for your life. Well, at that moment, the king returned, and he misunderstood Haman's actions, or pretending to do so. The king actually accused Haman of attacking the queen. At that moment, at the king's command, guards standing nearby covered Haman's face, and that meant that he's in a heap of trouble. He's doomed. And to be sure, the Lord orchestrated all of this, even for the king to come back in at the exact moment that he did. Haman is gone. Okay, verse 9. And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains or eunuchs, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordicai, who had spoken good for the king, stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him on it. Notes. Well, here we go. Evidently, Haman had erected the gallows within the compounds of his house, which no doubt was quite large and included many acres of gardens and whatnot. Now he's going to get hung on his own gallows, adding so much more insult to injury, okay? Verse 10, So they hung him on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Notes. Well, the king realized that he was having all his cards played against him by Haman. Completely made a fool of him up until then. So he determined to settle the score in the worst way of all, and he was rather successful at it. Chapter 8. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. Notes. And to be sure, it was considerable, because Haman had been one of the richest men in the empire. Now it all belongs to Esther, and Haman is dead. All of this orchestrated by God. And when it says, And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her, she revealed that Mordecai was the uncle of her. Verse 2. And the king took off his ring which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Notes. In effect, the king made Mordecai the prime minister, okay? Joseph and Daniel were also prime ministers to heathen princes. Getting advice from Jewish people that are on the up and up was definitely a benefit, notably here, and especially to Nebuchadnezzar. And if I remember correctly, he actually gave his life to God in chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. He's one of my favorite kings in history, by the way. But if God, in the pursuit of His purposes, places one of His servants in such a high position, He will give him grace and wisdom to glorify the Lord in that position. But an ambitious Christian who, by his energy and talent, and in order to gratify himself, he will grasp at something like that and cannot count upon God to deliver him from its snares and temptations. So you got to be careful whenever you're in a position of authority. That's a quote by Williams, by the way. Verse 3, And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. Notes. Now the golden scepter was held out simply to express a readiness to do as Esther desired in this case. And you have to keep in mind that the king's spoken word to have all the people destroyed, that was still in effect. But there's a loophole here, and I'll cover it. Verse 5. And said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Notes. Now, as I said, the laws of the Medes and the Persians they could not be irrevoked. I mean, the king could not recall his decree. But he could issue a fresh one authorizing Esther's people to defend themselves against all of them who should attack them. Okay, so there is a little loophole right here that's going to work wonders. Verse 7, Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Notes. Mordecai is now included in the king's response, mind you. He's his right-hand man now. Verse 8, Write you also for the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Notes. In effect, he is saying to Mordecai, surely you can devise something which will save your people without calling on me to retract my own words, which would break a great principle of Persian law. Whatever came out of the king's mouth, that was the law. And if he revoked it, he could be killed. Okay, people would turn on him. Verse 9, Then were the king's scribes called at the time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, which would be our June, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and to the deputies, and rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. Notes. Well, and it does seem that copies of the former edict had not been sent especially to the Jews. They had been left to learn their danger indirectly from the people among whom they dwelt. But Mordecai took care that they should be informed directly of their right of defense. Okay, put up your dukes and defend yourself. Verse 10, And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by messengers on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Okay, notes. Now, we have some translation problems right here, but it seems that the older manuscripts do not contain the words mules, camels, and etc., but rather thoroughbred horses and whatnot, which no doubt is correct. That would be the fastest mode of transportation in those particular days, but be that as it may, so it is. Verse 11, Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Notes. The earlier edict had given permission to the Jews' enemies to kill and to take. Now the new law, while not forbidding the former, gives the Jews the same privileges in every respect. He's given them the law that they can defend themselves with whatever they can get their hands on, so it might be dangerous to attack them. Verse 12, Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and the Jews should be ready against the day to avenge themselves of their enemies. And we will pick up in chapter 8, verse 13. Thank you, and God bless.